The sun blazed down on the shimmering water of the community pool, its surface dancing with golden reflections. Laughter echoed in the air, mingling with the splash of cannonballs and the delighted squeals of children. Families lounged under striped umbrellas, sipping cold drinks while toddlers toddled along the edges of the shallow end. It was the kind of summer day that seemed frozen in perfect simplicity. Wordplay. Jamal sat by the edge of the pool, his legs dangling into the cool water. At 14, he carried the effortless energy of youth, his laughter ringing out as he tossed a basketball back and forth with a group of friends. He was dressed in swim trunks and a bright green t-shirt, his smile as warm as the sun above. "Come on, Jamal. Bet you can't make this shot," one of his friends teased, holding the ball just out of reach. Jamal grinned, his brown eyes lighting up with mischief. "You're on," he said, lunging forward with a playful splash. The ball soared through the air, narrowly missing the edge of the diving board, before landing with a triumphant swish into the net they had set up at the pool's edge. "Got it," Jamal exclaimed, raising his hands in victory as his friends cheered. Across the pool, a woman in her late 40s entered the scene, her presence sharp and commanding. Karen's straw hat shaded her pale face, but it couldn't hide the stern set of her jaw or the critical sweep of her gaze. Her son, a boy of about 8, trailed behind her, clutching a float shaped like a flamingo. Karen stopped near the entrance, her eyes narrowing as she scanned the bustling pool area. She adjusted her designer sunglasses, the gesture deliberate, almost calculating. Spotting Jamal and his friends by the basketball hoop, her lips pressed into a thin line. "Stay close," she muttered to her son, her tone clipped. "Okay, Mom," he replied, looking up at her curiously. Karen leaned down, whispering something to him. The boy's eyes flickered toward Jamal's group before darting away. Karen's expression soured further, and she straightened with an air of resolute authority. Without a word, she strode toward the lifeguard's chair. The young lifeguard, barely out of high school, looked up in surprise as Karen's shadow fell over him. Oh shit. Excuse me," Karen began, her voice loud enough to carry. "I don't think those boys belong here." The lifeguard blinked, glancing toward Jamal and his friends. Ma'am, they're not doing anything wrong," he replied hesitantly. "They're just playing." Ah, Karen crossed her arms. "This is a private pool, isn't it?" "Are you sure they're supposed to be here?" The lifeguard hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. "It's a community pool, ma'am. They live here." Karen's eyes narrowed further, and she huffed, turning on her heel. She muttered something under her breath as she headed back toward her chair, but her gaze remained fixed on Jamal and his friends. Jamal, unaware of the scrutiny, laughed again as he made another shot. But the vibrant energy of the pool began to shift. The tension Karen carried with her hung in the air like a storm cloud, unseen but palpable. Something was about to happen. The sun blazed overhead as Karen marched across the pool deck, sandals slapping against the concrete. Her son trailed hesitantly, but Karen's focus was fixed on Jamal and his friends. Jamal sat on the edge of the pool, water dripping from his legs as he reached for a basketball. Karen's shadow suddenly loomed over him. "Gillett?" "You," she snapped, her voice sharp. Jamal looked up, startled. "Me?" "Yes, you," Karen crossed her arms. "What are you doing here?" Jamal exchanged glances with his friends. Playing basketball?" "This is private property," Karen declared. "You don't belong here. Who let you in?" Jamal stood holding the ball. "I live here," he said evenly. Karen's eyes narrowed. "Don't lie to me. I've lived here for years, and I've never seen you. I saw you." "I'm not lying," Jamal said, his voice firm. "My mom and I moved in a few months ago." Karen scoffed. "Townhouses, right? Figures." The comment stung, but Jamal remained composed. "I have a key card," he said, showing the lanyard around his neck. Karen barely glanced at it. Anyone could get that. Just because you have a card doesn't mean you belong. Jamal's grip tightened on the ball. I'm not doing anything wrong, he said calmly. I have the right to be here. Karen flushed with frustration. You're being disrespectful. If you don't leave, I'm calling the police. Jamal froze, her threat heavy in the air. Call them, he said quietly but firmly. I'm not doing anything wrong. Karen dialed, loudly exaggerating the situation. Yes, I need an officer. There's a group causing trouble and refusing to leave. The poolgoers murmured as the confrontation unfolded. Some recorded on their phones. Others called out, "Leave him alone." The viewers can't see who's being ashamed. They only hear the conversation. Look, Jamal stood tall, refusing to back down. I'm not going anywhere, he said. Karen lowered her phone, smug. We'll see about that. The crowd around them grew, the once relaxing summer day now charged with tension. Jamal's friends whispered nervously, but he remained firm, his heart pounding. No matter what happened next, he wasn't backing down. Murrah! Jamal stood firm, his hands gripping the basketball tighter. The sunlight felt harsher now, the carefree warmth of the poolside replaced by a rising wave of tension. Karen's threats hung in the air, sharp and grating. You need to leave, Karen demanded, her voice rising above the soft murmurs of the growing crowd. This isn't a place for you to loiter and cause trouble. Jamal took a deep breath, his expression calm but resolute. I'm not doing anything wrong, he said, his tone steady. You can call whoever you want. I'm staying. Karen's face flushed with anger, her lips tightening into a thin line. You're being disrespectful, she snapped, pointing an accusatory finger at him. You think you can just stand here and ignore me? I won't have it. Her voice carried across the pool, drawing more attention. People were watching now, not just with curiosity, but with concern. A few parents whispered to each other, their expressions uneasy. Ooh, I'm not disrespecting you, Jamal replied, his voice firm but controlled. I'm just not leaving because I have no reason to. I live here, and I have every right to be here. The certainty in his voice only seemed to fuel Karen's frustration. She turned to the bystanders, gesturing wildly toward Jamal. Do you see this? She exclaimed. He's disrupting the peace for everyone here. The crowd murmured, their reactions mixed. Some looked away, uncomfortable with the confrontation. Others frowned, clearly siding with Jamal. A middle-aged black woman sitting under an umbrella finally spoke up. Ma'am, he's not bothering anyone, she said, her tone calm but pointed. Leave the boy alone. Let him enjoy the pool like everyone else. Karen turned sharply toward the woman. Excuse me, she said, her voice dripping with incredulity. This isn't your business. It's everyone's business when you're harassing a kid, the woman shot back. Another voice chimed in, this time from a young man leaning against the diving board. Yeah, seriously. He's not doing anything wrong. Why don't you just back off? Vic. Karen's frustration boiled over. She huffed loudly, ignoring the growing chorus of dissent. You people don't understand, she said, her tone defensive. This is about following rules. Jamal met her gaze, his calm demeanor unwavering. What rule am I breaking? He asked, his voice steady and clear. She frowned. It's just a rhythm, the people you meet during the week. You go to the gym. Karen faltered for a moment, her mouth opening and closing as if searching for an answer. Finally, she straightened, pulling out her phone. Fine, she said, her voice cold. If you're not going to leave, I'll let the police handle it. The crowd collectively stiffened as Karen dialed, her voice loud and dramatic, carried across the pool as she spoke to the dispatcher. Yes, I need officers to come to the community pool on Main Street, she said. There's a group of teenagers causing a disturbance and refusing to leave. It's making everyone uncomfortable. The crowd murmured again, several people shaking their heads in disbelief. Jamal's friends exchanged uneasy glances. their earlier confidence slipping away. "Why is she doing this?" one of them whispered. "He was trying to make it worse," another replied, his voice tense. Jamal felt the weight of the moment pressing down on him. He stood a little straighter, trying to ignore the growing knot in his stomach. The calm facade he wore felt fragile now, cracks forming beneath the pressure of Karen's actions. Sariba Jera began to speak. "I'm moving on from here. I have a job description lined up with a major company. I have a shot. Are you okay?" one of his friends asked softly, stepping closer to him. Jamal nodded, though his heart was pounding. "Yeah," he said quietly. "I'm fine." But he wasn't fine. He knew what Karen's exaggerated call meant. He'd seen enough stories, heard enough warnings, to understand how quickly situations like this could spiral out of control. Not long before, that same team had released him from a lease. Still, he refused to back down. He tightened his grip on the basketball, his voice firm as he said, "I'm not leaving. I've done nothing wrong." 2 minutes later, the middle-aged woman under the umbrella stood up, her face set with determination. She moved closer to Jamal, standing between him and Karen. "You're not alone, honey," she said, her voice warm but resolute. "We've got your back." Her eyes lit, her lips parted one side, becoming three in only a thin line. Karen rolled her eyes, turning away as she continued her call. "Yes, they're still here," she said into the phone. "No, they're refusing to cooperate. Please send someone quickly." The tension in the air was palpable, every eye fixed on the unfolding scene. Jamal swallowed hard, forcing himself to stay calm. He glanced at the woman beside him, her presence a small but significant comfort. "Thank you," he said quietly. She smiled softly. "You're brave, kid," she said. "Don't let her scare you." The crowd around them murmured again, a few voices rising in support of Jamal. The quiet hum of solidarity gave him strength. Despite the fear gnawing at the edges of his resolve, he stood his ground. He wasn't going anywhere. The sun blazed overhead as the pool confrontation reached its peak. Jamal stood firm, gripping his basketball tightly, his face a mix of defiance and resolve. Karen, pacing with her phone in hand, exaggerated her story to the dispatcher, while the growing crowd looked on, murmurs and recording devices filling the tense air. Then, a calm, steady voice cut through the commotion. "Jamal." All heads turned. Olivia Carter walked onto the scene, her navy suit sharp and her heels clicking with purpose. Her composed yet serious expression immediately shifted the energy. "Ma!" Jamal breathed in relief. Karen turned, squinting at Olivia. "Are you this boy's mother?" she asked with thinly veiled disdain. "You need to teach him not to trespass." Olivia's gaze locked onto Karen, cool and unwavering. She stepped to Jamal's side, placing a steady hand on his shoulder. "Are you all right?" she asked softly. Jamal looked up at her, feeling a little weirded out. He cleared his throat. "He said I don't belong here," Jamal explained, his voice steady but hurt. She called the cops. "Okay, Karen scoffed. "This is private property. He doesn't belong here." Olivia raised an eyebrow. "This is a community pool. My son has every right to be here." Karen's sneer returned. "I've lived here for years and never seen him. How do I know he's not lying?" Olivia stepped forward. "Because I raised him not to," she replied, her voice sharp. Karen rolled her eyes. "If you'd done your job as a parent, this wouldn't be happening." The crowd gasped audibly, but Olivia didn't flinch. "Let me be clear," she said, her presence commanding. "My name is Justice Olivia Carter, and this is my son." "Finally!" he roared and dashed toward her, shouting for them both to meet him. They had met her just as Olivia agreed that day. They were friends, and they'd be happy to welcome a bit older Mr. Justice Olivia Carter. "And this is my son." Karen froze, her face pale. "Justice," she echoed weakly. "That's yes." Olivia said firmly. I serve on the state's Supreme Court, the court that upholds laws you're twisting in your favor. Karen stammered, but Olivia pressed on, her tone cutting. You assumed my son didn't belong here because of his skin. You called the police without reason, risking his safety. That is unacceptable. I. The crowd erupted in applause. Karen, flushed with shame, shrank back as Olivia turned to Jamal. Are you ready to go home? What stories could I tell? He nodded, and with an arm around his shoulder, Olivia guided him toward the exit. Before leaving, she turned back to the crowd. Remember, she said, her voice firm, it's not enough to stand by. We all have a responsibility to act against injustice. Why? Because life wouldn't ever be right without you, said Nad. The applause followed them as they walked away, leaving Karen standing speechless, her arrogance shattered. Karen stood, frozen by the poolside, her phone still clutched tightly in her hand, her face flushed red, her earlier confidence shattered under the weight of Olivia's presence and the murmurs of disapproval from the crowd. She whispered, glancing around. I was just trying to protect the community, she stammered, her voice cracking under the strain. You don't understand, I thought. Olivia didn't let her finish. What exactly did you think? She asked, her tone sharp but controlled. That my son, sitting here playing basketball with his friends, was some kind of threat? Karen flinched, her gaze darting to the crowd before returning to Olivia. I wasn't trying to target anyone, she said defensively. I didn't recognize him, and I thought. You thought, Olivia interrupted, stepping forward, that you had the right to harass an innocent child because he didn't fit your idea of who belongs here. Karen's mouth opened and closed, her excuses faltering under Olivia's unwavering gaze. Let me make something clear, Olivia said, her voice carrying across the pool deck. Protecting the community doesn't mean targeting innocent people. It doesn't mean assuming the worst based on nothing more than the color of someone's skin. The murmurs in the crowd grew louder. Some people nodded in agreement, while others shifted uncomfortably. Karen glanced around, her face pale. I wasn't trying to be racist, she said, her tone almost pleading. I just thought, you thought wrong, Olivia said firmly. Her expression softened slightly, but her voice remained resolute. Do you have any idea how dangerous your assumptions could have been? You called the police. What if they had arrived and assumed the same thing you did? Do you know how quickly these situations can escalate? Karen looked down at her feet, her earlier bravado completely gone. This isn't just about today, Olivia continued. Her tone shifted, growing more reflective. This is about the pattern, about how often people like my son are made to feel like they don't belong. At school, at work, in their own neighborhoods. The crowd grew silent, hanging on her every word. Even those who had hesitated to take sides earlier now seemed transfixed by her presence. I've lived this, Olivia said, her voice steady but tinged with emotion. I've been followed in stores, stopped for no reason while driving, questioned in spaces where I had every right to be. And each time, it's the same excuse. I was just trying to protect. She looked directly at Karen, her gaze piercing. Do you understand the weight of those words? How they've been used to justify humiliation, exclusion, even violence? Had some help got a little help? She added with a wave of her hand. Karen scratched her jaw with a grating sound and shook her head. I fixed you a proper glove for your plovium. Ugh, do you want to stay or go? Karen nodded weakly, but Olivia wasn't finished. My son is 14, she said, her voice softening. He shouldn't have to explain himself to you or anyone else. He shouldn't have to wonder if playing basketball with his friends will make him a target. The middle-aged woman who had spoken up earlier clapped her hands slowly. "She's right," the woman said loudly, turning to the crowd. "We've all seen this happen. It's about time someone said it." Others joined in, their applause growing louder. Karen winced at the sound, her discomfort evident. But she didn't move. "You need to think about why you made the assumptions you did," Olivia said, her tone firm but not unkind. "Because until you do, nothing will change." Karen's shoulders slumped. I'm sorry," she said quietly, her voice barely audible over the applause. Olivia tilted her head slightly, studying her. "I appreciate the apology," she said after a pause, "but an apology is only meaningful if it leads to change." Erin blinked, her eyes darting nervously between Olivia and the crowd. "I'll try," she mumbled, her words uncertain. "Showing is a start," Olivia replied, "but reflection and action are what matter. If you truly care about this community, you'll take responsibility for the harm you've caused and make sure it doesn't happen again." The applause swelled again, filling the air with the sense of solidarity and resolve. A few people nodded toward Olivia, their expressions filled with gratitude and respect. Karen turned away, her face red, and hurried back to her chair. The confrontation had ended, but the echoes of Olivia's words lingered, their impact rippling through the crowd. Olivia turned to Jamal, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Let's go home," she said gently. Jamal looked up at her, his eyes filled with pride. "Thanks, Mom," he said quietly. As they walked toward the exit, the crowd parted to let them through. Many clapped, some murmured words of support, and others simply watched, their faces reflecting a mixture of admiration and introspection. Karen sat silently at her chair, her gaze distant. For the first time, she seemed to be grappling with the consequences of her actions. Whether her apology would lead to true change remained to be seen, but the lesson Olivia had delivered was undeniable, and for everyone watching, it was a moment they wouldn't soon forget. The sun had set by the time Olivia and Jamal reached home, but the story of what had happened at the pool was just beginning to spread. What started as a tense confrontation was now exploding across the internet, carried by the countless phones that had recorded every moment. "Whoa," she shouted, always a demonstrator. Within hours, clips of Olivia's calm yet powerful rebuke were everywhere. "Protecting the community doesn't mean targeting innocent people," one video began, capturing Olivia's piercing gaze as she addressed Karen. The caption read, "Justice Carter, the lesson everyone needed to hear." Another clip zoomed in on Karen's flustered face as Olivia declared, "An apology is only meaningful if it leads to change." The comments flooded in. "This woman is a hero. Handled that with more grace than Karen deserved. Racism has no place in our communities." End profiling. By midnight, hashtags like Justice Carter, FWA for racism at the pool, and Stand with Jamal were trending on multiple platforms. Influencers shared the story, amplifying it to millions. "This is the kind of leadership we need," one post read, paired with a clip of Olivia walking out of the pool area, her arm around Jamal. The footage ignited a firestorm of outrage and conversation. People shared their own stories of racial profiling, turning the moment into a movement. Parents of Black children expressed their fears, while allies pledged to do better in challenging discrimination when they saw it. But among the challengers was an infant during rain preparation who was crying for his mom. "This isn't just one Karen, this is a system," one tweet read, garnering thousands of likes. News outlets quickly picked up the story. By the next morning, Olivia's name was on every major network. A polished news anchor narrated the events over footage of the pool confrontation. Justice Olivia Carter, a respected state Supreme Court judge, confronted racial profiling head-on yesterday when her teenage son was harassed at a community pool. Her composed but firm response has sparked national conversations about bias in public spaces. The segment cut to Olivia speaking outside the courthouse, her voice calm yet commanding. "This isn't about me," she said. "It's about the countless others who face this kind of discrimination every day. Change is long overdue." The news coverage elevated the incident from a viral moment to a rallying cry. Civil rights organizations and community leaders reached out to Olivia, eager to build on the momentum. But this is exactly why we need anti-racism training in every public space, an activist said during a televised interview. What happened at that pool isn't an isolated event. It's a symptom of a much larger issue. Karen, meanwhile, found herself at the center of a very different kind of attention. Her name, once anonymous, was now synonymous with privilege and prejudice. Her HOA received dozens of complaints from residents who were appalled by her behavior. "She doesn't represent us," one neighbor wrote in a letter shared online. "This community values inclusion and respect. What she did was unacceptable." Faced with mounting pressure, the HOA required Karen to attend mandatory sensitivity training. The pool management team also took swift action, updating its policies to prevent similar incidents. Signs were posted around the pool: "Zero tolerance for discrimination." Staff received training on how to handle conflicts equitably, with an emphasis on ensuring everyone felt welcome. For Karen, the consequences were humbling. The weight of public scrutiny forced her to confront her actions in a way she never had before. The sensitivity training sessions were uncomfortable but eye-opening. She listened as instructors shared stories of how implicit bias impacts lives, realizing that her own assumptions had contributed to a system she now saw clearly for the first time. But the impact of Olivia's stand didn't stop there. Schools and community centers across the state began implementing workshops on diversity and inclusion. Town halls were held to discuss systemic changes, with residents citing Olivia's words as inspiration. "I saw the video," one attendee said at a local meeting. "She said it best. We all have a responsibility to speak up. This isn't just about one person, it's about all of us," she continued. Jamal's story also resonated deeply. At school, he was approached by classmates who shared how proud they were of him. Teachers invited him to speak during assemblies, and his quiet strength inspired others to share their own experiences of facing bias. "I didn't want to make a big deal," Jamal said in one of his talks. "But my mom taught me that standing up for yourself isn't about making a scene. It's about making a difference." And that's exactly what they did. The ripple effect of that summer day at the pool was undeniable. From policy changes to personal growth, the lessons learned reached far beyond the edges of the water. For Olivia, the moment was bittersweet. She hadn't wanted her son to experience such prejudice, but she was proud of how he had handled it, and prouder still of the change their family's courage had sparked. "Awareness is the first step," she said during a televised interview. "But awareness alone isn't enough. We need action, we need accountability, and we need it now." The interview ended with a clip of Olivia and Jamal walking hand in hand, their bond unshaken. Together, they had turned a painful experience into a beacon of hope and progress. And the world was listening. The room was packed. Cameras clicked incessantly, capturing every angle, every expression. Olivia Carter stood at the podium, her hands resting firmly on the edges, her posture composed yet commanding. The quiet murmurs of the crowd fell silent as she began to speak. "This isn't just about one moment," she said, her voice steady but filled with purpose. "It's about something much larger, something that affects every community, every family, every person who has ever felt like they didn't belong." The room hung on her words, the weight of the incident still fresh in everyone's minds. Olivia's gaze swept across the audience, pausing briefly on familiar faces. Activists, community leaders, parents, and young people. All of them waiting, listening, hoping. "What happened at the pool wasn't just an isolated event," she continued. "It was a reflection of the biases we carry, the systems we've allowed to persist, and the harm that those systems inflict every day. But here's the truth. It doesn't have to be this way." Her voice softened, but her conviction grew. Bias doesn't have to define us. Fear doesn't have to divide us. We have the power to choose something different, something better. We have the power to foster inclusivity, compassion, and understanding. Starting in our own neighborhoods, our own schools, our own homes. The audience nodded, murmurs of agreement rippling through the crowd. I've spent my career upholding the law, Olivia said. But laws alone don't create justice. Justice is created by people, by communities that refuse to stand by when they see wrong, by individuals who speak up, and by all of us when we hold each other accountable. She paused, letting the words settle. It starts with awareness, but awareness isn't enough. It has to be followed by action, and action requires courage. The courage to confront our own assumptions, the courage to stand up for others, and the courage to demand change. Bulls broke out, growing louder with each passing second. Olivia stepped back for a moment, her chest rising with the intensity of the moment, but she wasn't finished. In 10 seconds or so, I want you to leave here today remembering this. Change is possible, but it won't happen unless we make it happen. Together, we can build a society where no child has to wonder if they belong. A society where everyone feels seen, valued, and respected. A society we can all be proud of. The applause swelled, filling the room with a sense of unity and hope. Olivia nodded once, her expression resolute. She stepped down from the podium and walked toward Jamal, who stood in the wings. "Ready?" she asked, her voice gentle. He nodded, his eyes bright with pride. "Yeah, Mom, let's go." As they walked out together, hand in hand, the cameras followed, capturing not just a moment, but a message, a call to action that resonated far beyond the room. This wasn't just a story about one family, one pool, or one community. It was a reminder that awareness, accountability, and compassion could light the way to a more just and inclusive world. And that journey was just beginning.